Last week was Australia Week in China. Australia's top service export is education, and China remains Australia's largest source for students, making up to a third of the overseas students in Australia. Our reporter Laura Luo talked with the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne to see how a 160-year-old university is ready for more interaction with China as Australia enters the Asian century.
Professor Glenn Davis, welcome to our show. Education has been Australia's top service exports for the recent years. So how big do you think this market is worth?
The market is worth about $14.5 billion Australian, and that's a figure that's been slightly depressed from earlier times when it was up to as high as 17. And most analysts expect us to regain the peak of the market and surpass it. There are some long-term analysis that say that the market could grow to as large as 30 billion Australian dollars. It's growing very strongly here in China, but also across Asia and particularly Southeast Asia.
And what role do students from China play in sustaining the boom of this market?
You're right, Chinese students account for nearly 30% of all international students in Australia, which is a very high number and reflects, of course, the great appetite in China for the opportunity to study abroad as well as to, of course, to work and live in China.
But I've read some statistics show that the number of Chinese students studying abroad, the growth rate has been slowing. That seems the student boom isn't going to last too long. So what is your strategy to compete with universities from other countries?
Universities will just have to compete harder for those students who do want to study abroad. Increasingly, we are seeing Chinese students studying their first degree at home in China and then going abroad to do a master's degree. That's become a very common pattern. And so we are seeing sharp growth in graduate programs. And that's our strategy. It's about speaking to that opportunity to study abroad, which many Chinese students still want. It helps with language, it helps with contacts, it helps with international experience.
The US has always remained a top pick for Chinese students who are willing to study abroad. One important reason is because the US job market provides more opportunities, whilst Australian job market is very competitive. It's almost impossible for non-permanent residents to stay and find a job. So what can universities in Australia do to improve this situation?
So one of the things that's been very encouraging in recent times is that the national government has changed the rules to allow more international students to stay and work on completing their degrees than was previously the case. That is really important, particularly in the professional areas where people, having studied, say, accounting, would like to work for one of the large accounting firms for, say, 2 years before they return to China.
As Australia enters the Asian century, will we see more communications and collaborations happening between Australian universities and Chinese universities?
Yes, the sense of an Asian century is very strong in Australia. It's the view that the world has changed in a very fundamental way. And a recent development is the announcement of what has been called the new Colombo Plan. The original Colombo Plan brought students from across Asia, including China, to Australia over the last 70 years. The new Colombo Plan is helping Australian students go and study in Asia. And so we at the University of Melbourne send about 3,000 students every year into the region, and we hope very much to increase that number so that most of our students in the long run will have had experience in Asia while they've been studying their undergraduate degree with us. That is our long-term aspiration.